boisterous stuff. No. If you can't hear me in the back row, please do me a favor and point to your ear, just like, oh, like something like that. Not yet. So just point to your ear because I forget, and it's something that I do all the time. And if you haven't heard my story yet, I'll repeat it. I was interviewed on New York Nightly News on NBC like 4 or 5 years ago. And it wraps up, and I walk off, and I was nervous as anything, and I walk off out of the area, and they come over and they said, "Oh, you spoke so well. Oh, we're very happy with everything." I'm like, "Oh, okay." And then they go, "But nobody could hear you." I was like, "Oh, okay." And they said that in the back room there was an evasive action where they had the dashboard, and they were throwing every switch up to the top. And they're like, "The guy doesn't talk." So if you can't hear me, point to your ear. So tonight, I strongly encourage all of you, I would ask all of you to chime in, to jump in on the conversation, to raise hands, to shout out. If you have questions, let them be known. If you have observations, please feel free to chime in. Tonight we're going to be talking about to talk about Caravaggio, it's between X-rated and quoting the Bible left and right. And so Caravaggio is a really interesting person to navigate. And if you can't see it in my face, he is one of my absolute favorite artists of all time. What's interesting about Caravaggio is that for his body of work, if you think about actually Michelangelo really had a career that spans 7 or 8 decades. And I would throw his baby years into there because the guy was producing work like, he says from when he was suckled by his wet nurse, who was a stonemason's wife. Caravaggio had a 10-year career. 10 years. And the art world would never be the same again. So very excited for tonight's lecture. Let's start out with a good quote. Caravaggio can't paint unless he has a model in front of him. So, Caravaggio, interestingly enough, was a very hated figure. He was hated for the same reason that anyone is hated. I'll never forget being in Europe right after Lance Armstrong. He won the Tour de France and he was just going on speaking tours. I swear, every other person I would talk to, Lance Armstrong's name was on their lips and they talked about how much they hated him because he won the Tour de France and this and that, and so there was more wrapped up in it. But it struck me for a moment that when you're at the top like that, man, you can be really detested, you can be really hated. So Valori is one figure the biography on Caravaggio, he throws the guy under the bus, like left and right. It's interesting because if you think of what was happening in Europe at this time, if you think about the glories of Raphael, the incredible things that Michelangelo had done, then all of a sudden you have this decadent painter who's not painting the glorious Greek, who's like always like spiraling like this. He's doing a different thing. He's going into the brothels. He's going into the saloons. There are no saloons are wrong, but you get my picture. He's painting the dark underbelly, and he's painting it from life. So let's go back to this quote. Caravaggio can't paint unless he has a model in front of him. When he, Caravaggio, was showing the most famous statues of Phidias and Lycaon in order that he might use them as models, Caravaggio's only answer was to point towards a crowd of people, saying that nature had given him an abundance of masters. This is a big deal. If you're in Italy, there is no such thing as Italy at this point, but let's just say you're in northern Italy, you're in the Lombard region, and you decide that you're not going to paint anymore after the Greek statues, but instead you are going to point to a crowd and say, these are my masters. You are taking all the tradition and turning it on its ear. So let's read another quote. The coming of Caravaggio is an omen of the ruin and demise of painting, comparable to how at the end of the world, the Antichrist, with false miracles and strange deeds, will lead to perdition great numbers of people who will be moved by his works. I mean, pause. Doesn't it sound jealous to you? I mean, You know you're on the right path if you're being called the Antichrist, and that you're leading people to perdition with your great works. I think of my father's stories of going to an Irish Catholic school in Ronkonkoma in the 60s, and how the nuns, when the young students would come in, the nuns would check to make sure that nobody was wearing beetle boots. No beetle boots allowed. There's this thing that when there's this incredible upsurge, there's something to counter it. So let's move on. Who will be moved by his works, apparently so admirable, but actually deceiving, false, and transitory, to say that he is the true Christ. Thus, this anti-Michelangelo. Don't you love how it goes anti-Christ and then it goes anti-Michelangelo? Because they're one and the same, you know what I mean? Like, has been able to persuade such a great number and variety of people that his is good painting, and his method and doctrine the true ones, that they have turned their backs on the true way of achieving eternity. If you like Michelangelo's paintings, you're going to hell. That's what he's saying. Because Michelangelo's paintings are the way to heaven, Caravaggio's paintings is the way to hell. Laughable. It's really comical as we look at it now. But think about this for a moment. We're laughing right now. But this is the day and age in which great tumult is underway. I'm going to pull up a few faces and a few figures, so I'll wait for a moment to say that. This is a time of upheaval, and if you did the wrong thing, you crossed the wrong people, you weren't just, your book, it wasn't like, oh, my book didn't get published, the publishers didn't like it. And it wasn't just, oh, the gallery didn't accept my work because the censors are just so severe with the New York Times. You slipped up and you did the wrong thing, and you were being tied to a stake, and somebody was lighting a match at your feet. And so I'm not saying that that happened to painters, but that was happening to some of the leading theologians, some of the leading minds in Europe at this point in time. But let's go back to Michelangelo Merisi's hometown, Caravaggio. I have given the full dates, 1571 to 1610. I haven't done that yet for any lecture, because look at that short little time span. I mean, that is a really short blip when you think about it. So 1571 to 1610, and I couldn't actually, he's from such an obscure town that really isn't notable as far as Google is concerned. It was hard pulling up good images, so I gave images from the environs in northern Italy. As we jump into into Caravaggio's work, the thing that we have to keep in mind is that we're dealing with a man who, by the age of 20, had already served 1 year of prison time. So I can't imagine if I had Caravaggio as a student. I would have a hard time with that. So Caravaggio, by the age of 20, had already served 1 year in prison. Amazing. But what is it to be Caravaggio, to serve 1 year? He who has been forgiven much loves much. This is an important theme that's going to run through Caravaggio's work. And what you see right here is absolutely shattering in the history of Western art. This is a detail of a painting done later in his life. And in this painting, you have Mary holding Jesus standing in a doorway. And in that doorway are peasants coming to pay homage. And as the peasants bow down to pay homage to the figure of the Messiah, this is all set in contemporary Rome. Look at the feet. The feet are filthy. They're absolutely disgusting. So up until this point, if you were a peasant, you were really beautiful, and you were a Greek god yourself, and when you bowed down to pay homage, you looked like you just emerged from, like, you know, having like a nice like massage and spa, and you had your hair lightened, and you were kind of like buff and rippling with muscles, and you were making supplication like that. Caravaggio gives us filthy feet, and these feet caused an outrage in the city of Rome. These disgusting, dirty feet. The clergy said, "How dare you give us dirty feet?" Caravaggio goes, "How dare I give you dirty feet?" Jesus, his whole ministry was one of ministry to tax collectors and prostitutes and the scum of that society. He said, can't you have a peasant coming to, you know, for supplication? But they didn't want it. They wanted their Greek grandeur. So there's an interesting schism that's taking place in the identity. But let's go back to Caravaggio's youth. 1577, Caravaggio is 5 years old, and his father and his grandfather died on the same day. After his father and his grandfather died, shortly thereafter his mother dies. I mean, the guy had a hard beginning. Everywhere, they say, I forget the population of Europe, but it was reduced by like a third in the space of just, I think, a decade. And I have some medieval scholars in the room that could confirm the actual numbers. But suffice to say, there were blocks in Florence, in the city of Florence, where 4 out of 5 people died. I mean, unbelievable. So Caravaggio, as a young boy, he's in a world that we're not in right now. I'm not saying there has no dark times in the modern times, but he's in a world that is very different than the world that you and I experience, in that losing the father, losing the grandfather, death all around him, and then he's sent off as an apprentice, as a young boy, 11 years old, to become an apprentice. Just like such a radically different experience.
Is this one?
Nope, I'm sorry. This is, it's just a simple woodcut. Okay. And yeah, it's just illustrated at that point in time. What's that?
He couldn't be here, so he would have been 6.
He would have been, he was precocious. So I'm including a quote, a poem by John Keats. John Keats would come around for another 3 centuries, but I think this is pertinent when we think of people like Caravaggio. We were listening to John Denver in the studio the other day. We were painting, and Judy, where are you? And we were talking about, how did he know at a young age, how did he write all these things about his loving to be around people and, you know, hoping that he can stick around for a little while? There's something, like sometimes these young, brilliant minds almost have a sense from the beginning that their hours are numbered. Caravaggio even more so, because he was a violent man. When I have fears that I may cease to be, before my pen has gleamed my teeming brain, before a high pile of books and charactery hold like rich garners the full ripened grain, when I behold upon the night's starred face huge cloudy symbols of a high romance, and I think that I may never live to trace their shadows with the magic hand of chance. And when I feel, fair creature of an hour, that I shall never look upon thee more, never have relish in the fairy power of unreflecting love, then on the shore of the wide world I stand alone and think, till love and fame to nothingness do sink. It's interesting. Another poem he has, it says, like a sick eagle looking at the sky. And I detect some of this in Caravaggio's young work, and maybe it's just me reading into it. But I really do think that he had a sense of seeing death and such destruction at a young age. So who were his contemporaries? So we just saw that he was born in 1571. Galileo Galilei, 1564. Galileo and Caravaggio were in the same palace at the same time. Pretty neat, right? I love when you go back in history, you realize that a lot of these guys are overlapping each other. Galileo said, in questions of science, the authority of 1,000 is not worth the humble reasoning of a single individual. That is big. The ramifications of that were so great. As you know, Galileo was forced to recant his heliocentric theory because he wasn't placing the Earth at the center of the universe, which, if you're interested at all, it's a Greek idea that it has to be a geocentric universe. There's nothing in the Bible that says that the Earth has to be the center, but the church felt that if you were countering the Greeks, you were countering spiritual, you were countering the Bible. So you see how there's this interwoven thing between Greek paganism and what I'll just say biblical authority. But it's interesting that at the same time that this is going on, we also have, we're going to jump forward, we have Martin Luther. So Martin Luther proceeds by quite some time, 1483. But we just saw Galileo say, in the case of authority, 1,000 people may say one thing and you can be one lone individual. We have, right here, we have Martin Luther, we have the Protestant Reformation, which is well underway. And so these things are all stirring in Europe. So I'm going to double back quickly. What else is going on right now? Shakespeare is born. 1564. So Caravaggio is 1571. It is pretty interesting to me that this thing is happening all across Europe. It's not solely like a spiritual thing, it's not solely a biblical thing. Shakespeare is born and is going to forever change Western literature. Concealed in this equation is the indefinable quality that makes Caravaggio the first artist in history whose paintings seem directly concerned with his own life. 10 years before Shakespeare invented Hamlet, Caravaggio painted St. Francis in solitary dialogue with a skull. Caravaggio introduced soliloquy into painting at the same time that Shakespeare perfected it in drama and Montaigne created the essay as a form of self-portrait. There are stirrings. There's trouble afoot. And again, we already touched on the Protestant Reformation. But with the Protestant Reformation, what's important is for you to remember Germans, Lutherans, Italians under the Catholic Church, and there's the Holy Roman Empire that's straddling all this. And in the midst of all this tumult is the sack of Rome. So it preceded Caravaggio's life by just a little bit, but he would have grown up knowing that the French leader actually led troops that were from the Italian province who went into Rome and just wiped the city out, cleaned out all the palaces. I mean, they did great damage. So the sack of Rome would have been vivid in the life of Caravaggio. Maybe he's as close to the sack of Rome as maybe I would be to the Vietnam War or something like that. It would be very present in his mind. And then we have the Counter-Reformation. Sorry for the small font. The Counter-Reformation. So the Counter-Reformation, for me, is one of the most, it's an interesting single horse that sometimes for Caravaggio becomes two horses. In that the Counter-Reformation was seen as the way of getting the heretics to come back to the fold. So we have the Protestant Reformation, the 95 Theses are nailed to the doors, and grievances are made known. The Counter-Reformation, the Catholic Church rebounds, and if there's anyone who's Protestant Catholic in here, I'm not stirring up this friction between you, I'm just talking about historically. The Catholic Church said, we're going to bring people back into the fold, we're going to annihilate all the heresy that's out there circulating, and to do so, we're going to use you, Caravaggio. Caravaggio goes, me? I just got out of jail. And they said, you're very good at painting. The only thing is, Caravaggio was in the city of Rome when, I think his name is Geraldo Bruno, was burned at the stake because he had published some spiritual treatises, some spiritual treatises that were in conflict with the Catholic Church. So Caravaggio would have seen the city squares where Bruno was burned alive. But he wasn't the only one. At this point, this huge Inquisition was taking place. And with the Inquisition, there was a mass expulsion of different people groups. Muslims were expelled from Spain. Jews were expelled from Spain. There was terrible civil unrest. Fun time to begin your career as a painter. So let's look at Caravaggio's hometown. You can see Milan is right here. All the way down here is Rome. And then I want you to look up here and see Munich. Now, you could say to yourself, well, he's from northern Italy, he's Italian. But at this point in time, if you are up in Milan, if you're right on the outskirts in Caravaggio, where are you closer to? You're actually closer to Germany than you are to Rome. And what's interesting is that in Germany, there's something called the Northern Renaissance taking place, or it has been taking place for a long time. So you have Albrecht Dürer, you have all these incredible painters from the north, but the northern painters, remember, they don't have the Greek sculptures. Do you remember we talked about that with Titian? So Vasari was writing about Titian and said Titian would have been a great painter if he had only had the Greek sculpture to make his work more grand. And then you think of Michelangelo. Michelangelo had the Greek sculpture. So what happens when you don't have sculpture that's grand and all you have is the people in front of you? You have Albrecht Dürer, self-portrait at the age of 28. And if you are following hard on the heels of Michelangelo, what is probably the wisest thing for you to do if you're down in Rome? Let's talk about Albrecht Dürer first. Albrecht Dürer, he painted this looking in the mirror. It's very obvious, right? This is a painting. I actually think this is an outstanding painting. It's singular for me in art history, with the piercing eyes. It's even slightly creepy, but I really like this painting a lot. This piece, look at the realistic flesh tones. Look at the believable water that's in the eyes. I mean, it's an absolutely gorgeous rendering of a human face, but the flesh is palpable. You believe that that is a human spirit. That's awful. For anyone who likes Parmigiano, the only thing I could say at the end of this lecture is, sorry. I'm sorry. I'm going to be throwing him under the bus along with his Mannerist buddies left and right. So if you are in Rome and Michelangelo is on his way out and Michelangelo is the greatest thing that ever happens, what do you do in order to best Michelangelo? The thing that you do is you take Michelangelo's work and you copy it, right? Because if you want to be like Michelangelo, well then you got to be Michelangelo part 2. And so what happened was there's this terrible period that art falls into. And again, if people in this room love Parmigiano, it's a taste thing, I understand it. But coming from the perspective of a naturalist, somebody who encourages students towards naturalism, that neck, it's actually called Madonna of the Long Neck. I don't know what to say. Like the figure of that baby, I mean, can you imagine that thing being birthed? Like, poor mother. Everything in this piece looks false to me. Everything in this piece this is technical fireworks at its best. Those are really great drapes. The pose is even like, it's designed pretty. What's that?
It looks like she's gonna drop.
Yeah, it looks like she's gonna drop them. Yeah, that's a good point. Like, so many things about this are just false and metallic and tinny, and it's just that. So you're Caravaggio. Michelangelo is still alive when you're born. You're keenly aware of his greatness. What do? You're from Milan. You know that you want to succeed with the Romans because that's where all the money is. You think about someone else who's from Milan. Da Vinci. But guess who's becoming old hat in Milan? Da Vinci. When you have something really great in your presence for a long time, and then when you have something great in your presence for a long time, familiarity can breed contempt. If you are painting in the manner of Da Vinci or Giorgio, and you're in Milan, it's like, I don't know what to say. It's like being in a certain decade in the United States and you're playing music from the previous decade in the same city. There's a redundancy there. But Caravaggio, he loved the work of Da Vinci. He loved the work of Giorgio. And Caravaggio would come to study with an interesting painter from the north of Italy called Peter Zano. And Peter Zano would sign his work, Un studente di Tiziano. And if my Italian's incorrect, Nino, yell at me afterwards, and Paul, you can yell at me too. I'm a student of Titian. So Caravaggio's teacher would sign his work saying a student of Titian. So again, you can see this really interesting thing taking place. Now, if you're Caravaggio, you're also thinking about the late Renaissance's version of Instagram. The Gothic sun set behind the colossal press at Mainz. Victor Hugo. Johannes Gutenberg, Mainz, 1400 to 1468. So the Gutenberg printing press has just gone live. And so I know that I'm proceeding by a century, but it really took a while for all the techniques to get out there, for the technology to spread to other cities. If you look at these men working, neither of these are done by Caravaggio, but what's happening at this point in time is the printing presses are starting to register with the common people. And so what happens? Giorgio Vasari, Vasari gets made fun of a lot for not being a good painter, and that's why he had to go right. I actually think Giorgio Vasari was a pretty decent painter in his best moments. In his worst moments, yeah, we all have poor works, but Giorgio Vasari was a competent painter, and he wrote his book, The Lives of the Most Excellent Artists, Painters, Sculptors, and Architects. Le vite dei più eccellenti pittori, scultori, e architettori. So this book, when it was released, it was designed for mass consumption. It was designed to be disseminated through cities. And the thing is that this book, The Lives of the Most Excellent Painters, Sculptors, and Architects, had a heavy, heavy emphasis on the Italian province and on the central Italian painters and on the Florentine painters specifically. So you can regard that as being who's who in European art. So, like I said before, it's almost, it has like an Instagram-ish feel to it, where if you get into this group and you're shared in this group, you skyrocket to the top. So, of the northern painters that are influenced by the German naturalism, who gets into it? Vincenzo Campi, the food seller, painter from Italian Caravaggio, does he get into it? No, he's not who's who. It's a big deal if you're an artist and you don't get into this book. If you're an artist and you got left out of this, you just go hang your head low and you go back painting genre scenes for the minor nobles. Bartolomeo Passarotti. Does Bartolomeo get into this? No. No, he's not who's who. So, who does get into this? And pardon the modern slide, but I need context. Michelangelo. I came across this image and I put this up there, even though it's a modern construction house. I want you guys to see how colossal this piece is. And I want you to think about Caravaggio, who's trying to outperform Michelangelo. That is a hard task. Michelangelo, he's who's who. Who else is who's who? Titian. Titian's who's who. Caravaggio might think, wait a minute, I have hope. There's a synthesis here. Titian's who's who. Milan, 1584. At the age of 11 years old, he sets off, 11, 12 years old, he sets off for Milan. His mother passes away. And he's apprenticed to Peter Zano, the student of Titian. Now, an interesting thing is taking place in the face of this portrait by Peter Zano. And it's best illustrated by removing ourselves from the conversation about Michelangelo and everything, and just thinking for a moment about painting from life and painting from a drawing. So I did this little sketch here on the iPad, and I wanted to clarify what was taking place in the Mannerist period following Michelangelo. Here we have the David. Let's call that the product. Here we have an artist who's copying the David. The copied product based on the other guy's product. Okay? Now let's move forward beyond that. So then the artist would take the artwork that they copied by the other artist, and then they'd have the product based on the copied product based on the other guy's product. So, how many steps removed are we from the actual life itself? We're many steps removed, C, D, and E. So A, B, C, D, E. We're 5 steps removed from looking at somebody in the eye. Who was an artist who worked like this? Pontormo. I actually I was throwing Parmigianino under the bus, but I think Pontormo's a pretty great painter. He has some really nice work. But what's interesting is, look at all the faces in this piece. This is a Mannerist piece. Pontormo came after Michelangelo. And one of the things you can tell is that Pontormo came up with a stock superhuman. By super, I just mean long, something colossal, and just repeated the same face. Either that, or it's a really inbred family. The piece, this is a gorgeous piece. It's in Florence, right next to the Ponte Vecchio. It is a really beautiful piece. But you can see that art was taking a different direction. Remember we talked about the glory of the Renaissance was going back to the source? Leonardo da Vinci dissected 31 corpses. 31 corpses in a time in which it wasn't really allowed to dissect one corpse. That's how preoccupied da Vinci was. Michelangelo dissected under candlelight in the morgue by paying off the friar at the back of Santo Spirito. What's happening now? Well, what's happening now is that artists are not going back to life. They all want to one-up Michelangelo. Now let's jump over to this right here. There's another way of painting, and that's where you have the source, and then you have the drawing, and I call that the filter. Then you take the filter and you do a painting based on the drawing. So here's a drawing, and there's a painting based on the drawing. So up until Titian, this was largely the practice. And you can see there's a few steps removed where you can arrive at quite a different product because you're a few steps away. A, B, C. But here we have A, B, the model, the final product. So Caravaggio, I'm going to fast forward a little bit and say that when he was in court, he was asked to testify for why he got in yet another brawl. And he said, he wouldn't even address the claims against him. He said, "My name is Michelangelo Merisi, called Caravaggio. I am a painter from life." He was saying, hey, you know what, Romans? You know what, art world? You guys can all go paint from drawings. This can be you right here, or you can be Matterist. You can paint like that. I am cut from the cloth that Titian was cut from. And I am from northern Italy, and I'm not ashamed of it. Leonardo da Vinci. The painters after the Romans.
About the point that you keep bringing up is that there's so many steps involved, removing from life. And what happens is each step, there's a loss of information.
Yes, exactly.
And in order to complete the work, you're going to have to lie.
Yeah.
You're going to have to fill that
You're gonna have to fill in the
information in with
gaps.
something that's false.
Yep. And some artists will say, well, you're not filling it with something that's false, you're filling it with you. So I don't want to like tonight be here like say like you can never paint from a drawing, but something's lost.
Right.
Something's lost, and it has to be filled in, and that's the important point. Thank you for that. The painters after the Romans always imitated each other, and from age to age continually brought their art into decline. After these came Giotto the Florentine, who, not content to imitate the works of Cimabue, his master, being born in the solitary mountains inhabited only by goats and similar animals, and being guided by nature towards this art, began to draw upon the rocks the actions of the goat of which he was a keeper. And thus began to draw in this manner all the animals found in this countryside. After much study, he surpassed not only the masters of his own age, but all those of many centuries past. After this, art receded because all imitated existing paintings. And thus it went on from one century to the next, until Tommaso the Florentine, Let's fast forward to say, showed by perfect works how those who take for their guide anything other than nature, mistress of the masters, exhaust themselves in vain. This was Caravaggio's hero. I love that quote, the mistress of the masters. So let's go back and take a look at this painting that got rejected. If you look at it, it's actually not so bad. The still life is pretty good. It's actually a beautiful piece. This is German naturalism. And what are Germans? Again, I'm not saying it's pure German because it's Northern Italian, but it's influenced by the Northern Renaissance. It's also influenced by the Lutherans. So if you're going to go paint for the Catholic Church, that's in the heights of the Counter-Reformation and is in the heights of the Inquisition, are you going to bring a Lutheran art form? It's pretty scandalous, which is why I love Caravaggio. This is Caravaggio's first painting. It took us a half hour to get here, but I think it's so important to place in the context of what was taking place in the world around him. So in this piece, it's not a sensational piece. He didn't knock it out of the park, but he did pull off a few things that are interesting. That is a face of somebody that is knowable. It's not that Parmigiano face from a piece of marble. And on top of that, these are not glorious pieces of fruit. They're not like flowing over with like all leaves coming out of them and different things. They're just pieces of fruit laying on the table. Not much to it. It was so common, it was daring. I love how centuries later Cézanne would say, I'm going to astound Paris with a peach. It's that whole idea of the understatement. And so with such a common piece, Caravaggio was risking just being completely overlooked. But I want to talk about the little dots and the blemishes that you see on the work. And you'll see some dots and blemishes on some of the fruit that's over here. And as you look at this work, I'm going to fast forward in Caravaggio's career a little bit to talk about his battle with the Greek ideal and with reality and with life as it is in front of us. This is one of my favorite still life paintings of all time. I absolutely love this painting. And let's take a look at it, because in this beautiful painting we have bright life, young, full of, it's just rich. You just want to bite into it, it's gorgeous. And then you have a leaf bitten, a worm, bitten leaf, and you have things that are flawed. There's a horticulturist who identified that type of fungus right there in the apple. I've seen it before myself. You see little spots on the leaves. Caravaggio, with a quiet genre of still life painting, was setting off an atom bomb in the art world with a still life painting. It's so interesting. Look at this leaf right here. It's a grape leaf, crumpled up, on its way out, it's dying. This leaf is just completely in silhouette, not dying, but in silhouette, whereas this is accented in its lush. But even the lush leaf has a lot of decay. You know what Caravaggio was saying with his painting was, he was saying, this is the passage of time. You go from old to young, and I accept it. And if you don't accept it, you're living in a fantasy. That's something that was a theme that was carried through Caravaggio's work. So, have any of you guys heard of the saying, warts and all? Okay, so does anybody know the origin of warts and all? It's a fun story. Warts and all it's a funny moment in history in which when the Romans took over, the Romans were barbarians, they didn't know how to sculpt. It was understood that the Italians were terrible at art by the time when the Romans took over. So they went into Greece and they just took their conquered peoples, the Greek people, and they imported them to Rome and said, sculpt. And so when they sculpted, the Greeks sculpted perfection. And they brought with them absolute geometric perfection because the Greeks were about the ideal, the Neoplatonic essence. But the Roman emperors, they didn't want pretty and perfect. The Roman emperors wanted their portraits to be in the squares throughout their empire, and for people to be walking by pushing a cart to get a shiver down their spine and be like, don't mess with Caligula. Don't mess with them. Don't mess with them. So the emperor said, don't dress me up. I want you to paint me, I want you to sculpt me, warts and all. Do you want to mess with that? I wouldn't want to mess with that emperor. I don't even know which one it was. I found the ugliest Roman bust on the internet. But look at the difference between the two of them. Perfection. Warts and all. Warts and all. Caravaggio arrived in Rome and became Rome's greatest painter. Became Rome's greatest painter by a long shot. It's interesting. So here's his next piece that he paints, and he's starting to gain a little bit of momentum. At first he's just painting works for pennies in a little shop, and he's selling little heads of saints, literally for pennies. And in the contemporary period of time, it would have been like $2. So he's pretty much starving to death. And the artist with whom he's studying, he gives he was in an atelier, and he gave the person who ran the atelier, he gave him the nickname of Monsignor Insalata, which means salad, Mr. Salad, because the artist who ran the atelier was so cheap that he would only feed Caravaggio lettuce, and Caravaggio just wanted meat, and he wouldn't even give it to me. So Caravaggio paints this painting, and what happens? He's a really young man, and he gets snatched up by one of the most prominent collectors in the entire then-known world. So in Rome, he was actually asked to move into the palace of one of the leading families of Rome. Big deal. It's a really big deal. So as he's painting, he starts, that's a pretty face of a pretty boy. I mean, it's really ideal. And you can tell that Caravaggio enjoyed this piece. It's an immensely successful piece. But then his very next work is, Bacco Malato, the Sick Bacchus. And it's green. And the flesh tones are like disgusting. And why would you, when you're trying to build your name, you're competing with Michelangelo, paint that? I mean, he looks disgusting, he looks sick. You know why he painted that? Because he hung out in the taverns a lot, and they said that he would get drunk and he'd get into brawls and he would fight with other people. And I think he knew what it was to feel like that after drinking a lot of wine. The Greeks, the notion of Bacchus was the god of creativity, along with other muses and things of that sort. But when people drank wine, they got inspired and they produced great things. Caravaggio said, no, it's not the god of creativity, I'm hurt. So this is actually his self-portrait. And they said it was an exact likeness of him. I wanted to show you a drape by an artist, and actually, I'm sorry I forget his name right now, but this was done by one of Caravaggio's contemporaries to show you. We think of these artists as being these people that are unprecedented, nobody has ever seen. They came out of nothing, arose among thorns, and they produced something. Caravaggio was actually surrounded by highly competent painters. And I want you to see how Caravaggio uses these skills in rendering drapery from his time spent in an atelier. And you can call it an atelier or a workshop or a guild. It doesn't really matter. The point being that these exquisite folds right here, he was seeing works like this in the city of Rome. But that's a really beautiful face, and that's a really beautiful sky, and those are really beautiful boats, and everything is just so rosy and happy, isn't it? But Caravaggio says, no, it's not quite like that. And on top of, everyone wanted these 100, 10-mile deep paintings. Think of Leonardo da Vinci with his rocks and the mists and the atmosphere and things receding into space. Caravaggio says, well, I understand that you love the depth, and I understand that Leonardo da Vinci went through great work to get the depth in his paintings, but you're getting a blank background. And I'm going to shorten this stage, and I'm going to give you drama. So he produces this work, which is called The Fortune Teller. And the interesting thing is that when he produces these works, at the same time that he's working on them, he's bringing in to pose for these things the underbelly of Rome. So people would recognize the models and say, isn't that woman of the night? And Caravaggio would be like, yeah, it is. Isn't it a great painting? It's interesting that this piece actually became one of the most copied pieces in Roman history, where I think there are 35 existing copies of this painting. It was so charming, and he's also doing something else that's unusual. In addition to painting faces in a very idiosyncratic way, he's painting Romans in Roman garb. That's what the Romans were wearing. But when we saw Parmigianino before, everything was flowing, and it was almost like somebody was there on like a photo shoot with a fan, and everything's just blowing all the time. That is gravity pulling on clothing. It's very common. Then we have more paintings of lutes, violins. Don't forget Savonarola and the Bonfire of the Vanities. When Savonarola, before he was burned himself, he organized a Bonfire of the Vanities in which they threw their lutes into the fire. If you were a painter of pleasure, if you were a painter of just unbridled ecstasy, you were really doing something that was pretty risky. So even pieces like this posed like he was flirting with something that was the dark underbelly of Rome. And we have this beautiful piece right here. He shows us, I think, a hitherto unseen ability to paint still lifes with such sincerity. And they're not over-designed and they're not cute. But notice one thing, that Caravaggio is he's producing an art form that actually is his own approach to painting entirely, in that Caravaggio has brought a thesis to the art world, that everything is dark until light hits it. The world is dark until light hits it. Somebody taught me, is Ray? Ray was painting today in one of our classes, and in Hebrew she said, in the darkness, out of darkness, light comes. And she was like referring to like the book of Genesis, and it was really neat because I was about to talk about that with Caravaggio, and she said it in Hebrew. I repeated it 11 times so as to not forget, and I forgot. But there is this thought of everything in Caravaggio's world is dark until hit by this really harsh light, and there's really clean break-offs. We haven't seen this yet in painting. And sometimes Caravaggio would return to a theme, and he would just kind of like, he would almost like have a motif that he would repeat several times, just to see if he could push it further and where he could go with it. We have another beautiful young boy, and he's wearing something that, if that happened in one of our portrait painting classes, I probably would go like that. But Caravaggio, this is a beautiful piece. I think it's in the Uffizi Gallery. Look at this incredible mastery of still life and the believability of the flesh. This is Northern painting penetrating Roman society. So now we've gone through a number of genre pieces, and we're about to see that Caravaggio is going to start pushing things. So here we have the card sharks, or I forget what it's called, poker or something. I can't remember the title of it. But what is happening in this piece is that there's the scabbard immediately next to the hand that's pulling cards out from behind the back. And look at the look of innocence in that face. This is a really wonderful piece. Look at the glove with the tattered finger. I mean, I love this piece. I think it's so much fun. Look at that face. We have only seen something like this once before, and it was Da Vinci with his Adoration of the Magi, where you have old men that are looking over like that. You see an echo of it in that face right there. He's bringing Northern Italian Milanese painting down into Rome, and he is taking the entire city by storm. After a fortnight's work, he, Caravaggio, will swagger about for a month or two with a sword at his side and a servant following him, from one bull court to the next, ever ready to engage in a fight or an argument, so that it is most awkward to get along with him. That was his friend who said that. There are apparently in court records 4 full pages of Caravaggio's offenses in the space of 5 years. The guy was constantly in and out of jail. One of the things that impresses me the most about Caravaggio is how did he find time to produce so much work? He was always in jail. I don't get it. But there's another side to Caravaggio that really intrigues me. It's his penitent Magdalene. Magdalene oftentimes was an occasion for artists to show a really voluptuous woman. They'd have her with a plunging neckline. She'd be leaning forward, and you were supposed to really enjoy the spectacle of a prostitute, and men would have this in like a back parlor type thing. So if the penitent Magdalene was oftentimes reveling in the negative side of the story, what has Caravaggio painted here? He's painted absolute sorrow. I mean, when you see the head turned down, when you see like the gaze, there is like shattered pearls on the floor, broken string right here. She's cast aside all of her worldly possessions. Because if you want my opinion, what Caravaggio did was he actually read the story. So I'm going to skim through this. One of the Pharisees asked Jesus to eat with him, and he went into the Pharisee's house and reclined at the table. And behold, a woman of the city, who was a sinner, when she learned that he, Jesus, was reclining at the table in the Pharisee's house, brought an alabaster flask of ointment. That ointment was worth 1 year's wages. Crazy. So it could be like $30,000 to $70,000, the common man's wages. And standing behind Jesus at his feet, weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears, and wiped them with the hair of her head, and kissed his feet and anointed them with the ointment. Now when the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would have known who and what sort of woman this is who is touching him, for she is a sinner. And Jesus answering said to him, Simon, I have something to say to you. And he answered, say it, teacher. A certain moneylender had 2 debtors, one owed 500 denarii, the other 50. When they could not pay, he canceled the debt of both. Now which of them will love him more? Simon answered, the one, I suppose, for whom he canceled the larger debt. And he said to him, you have judged rightly. Then turning towards the woman, he said to Simon, do you see this woman? I entered your house. You gave me no water for my feet, but she's wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You gave me no kiss, but from the time I came in, she has not ceased to kiss my feet. You did not anoint my head with oil, but she has anointed my feet with ointment. Therefore I tell you, her sins, which are many, are forgiven, for she loved much. But he who is forgiven little, loves little. And so, why is it so important to talk about this? Because Rome had the absolute opposite mindset. If you go through the Florentine alleyways, have you ever gone through Florentine alleyways and seen the little dedicated statues up in the little coves? You know what they built those for? They built those because in time of plague, they wanted to be sure that the peasants who were sick didn't come near them. So they said, you can still worship. Worship in the alleyway. Worship that thing. We'll make a little cove for you. And they threw it out there. And so there's this thing with the clergy, where the clergy were fantastically wealthy, and the peasants were living in disease and filth and squalor. When Caravaggio painted this, it was a really big deal. It was so common. Her head, the way it's tilted, she's really not that good looking. And it changed the way that the art world, that the Roman world, that the collectors, that the clergy thought of one of the most important stories.
I think that when I look at that, to me, it's her, her gesture is like how someone would hold an infant.
I thought the same thing, yeah.
And so there is actually, I think, another narrative in this.
I think so as well, yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's almost either it's a barrenness, or like, pointing to her womb, or she's even birthing something more beautiful. We don't know.
Might be taking a nap.
Might be taking a nap. Rest.
Rest.
So now we're beginning a whole new body of work for Caravaggio. And what you see here is St. Francis. And St. Francis is an ecstasy. And I'm not going to go into the whole story behind it, but this is not a little boy playing a lute. He's starting to get serious. He's getting serious about life. He jumps back again, boy bitten by a lizard. That's a really great glass. Some of our students are painting glass right now. That's a great glass. I just wanted to point that out. So Melanie, when you're painting glass tomorrow, take a look at that before you start. But look at the expression on the face. He's painting from life. And he's probably painting his self-portrait in a mirror, because that looks a whole lot like his self-portrait on the other one. It's funny how he will play around with backgrounds, but I paint backgrounds sometimes in my figurative pieces, and oftentimes my wife says, yeah, why don't you do the Caravaggio background? I think you're better at that. I don't think that background is so successful on the left-hand side, but it's a beautiful and tender moment of the mother holding the child. You see a lot of Titian's influence there. And that's rests on the flight into Egypt. And what's interesting is that as Mary and Joseph are fleeing to Egypt, an angel comes to minister to them and plays a contemporary piece of music. Then we have Caravaggio commissioned to paint a piece commemorating one of the Grand Duke's victories in Tuscany over the French and over this and that. And so to commemorate this, he just wants something terrible, like horrifying and powerful. Caravaggio is the man for the job, and the Deuce is created. The funny thing is, that is Caravaggio's self-portrait again. He loves painting himself decapitated. The guy must have done it like 20 or 30 times in his art career. Again and again, painting himself with his head chopped off with blood squirting. It's a favorite motif. I love that piece. It's in the Uffizi. And every time that I would pass it, it would send like a shock because you round the corner. It's a really big piece. He returns again to the theme of the fortune teller. Look at the delicate touch between the hands here. Look at the little light of the fingernail right there. It's absolutely a beautiful piece. I want you to see them both side by side. So the fortune teller, the gypsy, in this painting is treated differently. And if you guys want, I can send the file over, but it's kind of interesting to study the dynamic between the faces and see how he's exploring things. I'm going to start moving a little bit through the pieces because I want to get to some of the pieces that have some of the sweeping drama and the violence that Caravaggio would get into. So Abraham sacrificing Isaac is one theme that could be treated in a very gentle way. It could be a father reaching down to his son and saying, you know, let us ascend Mount Moriah. It could be treated in many ways that would be tender, and oftentimes that's what they went with. Look at what Caravaggio has done. He's thrown the father of faith, he's thrown his face into darkness. There are veins popping out on his neck, and he's got a knife, and he's ready to jam it to Isaac's heart. I mean, if Caravaggio is not forcing you to ask yourself what is going to happen here, I mean, look at this piece. He's ready to do the deed. He's going to follow through. I just want to draw your attention again to that moment right there. There's blood coursing through the veins. This is a moment of agony when the angel suddenly comes and says, I provided a sacrifice. I mean, it's a really, for me, that piece is like, I'll say this one quick thing. We're looking at Caravaggio photographed by digital cameras on, it's going through many filters. Going through my iPad and going onto the screen. The paintings are not this black in real life. There's all subtle shifts all throughout all these areas. So if it looks really stark, it's actually just the photography and the fact that Caravaggio is, in my opinion, one of the most difficult painters to reproduce. He spares nothing. Judith beheading Holofernes. An interesting thing takes place. I'm going to fast forward a little bit to, does everyone here know Artemisia Gentileschi? Artemisia Gentileschi was an artist, and we'll call her a pupil of Caravaggio. And Artemisia was actually raped by another artist in the city of Rome. Artemisia went to court to defend herself and say that she was raped. And her fingers were placed in these torture devices that every few seconds they tightened a little bit more until they were almost threatening to sever the tips of her fingers off, all of her fingers, just because she had been raped by another artist. I mean, if that doesn't speak to gender inequality and injustice, that's a true story. That really did happen to Artemisia, and Artemisia is a really great painter. Caravaggio, in this piece, is actually really doing a beautiful piece that is knowingly defending women's roles. I'm not reading into this because when Cellini had his pieces, and when there were different pieces with beheadings by Donatello, the Florentines didn't like that in their city square that Donatello had put a piece of a woman cutting off a man's head. They said men should really be the ones doing violence to women. Women shouldn't be doing violence to men. That really was said. Caravaggio spins it, and he said, yeah, so I'm going to take this, I'm going to invert it for you. And, I mean, there's even blood gushing out of the arteries. It's pulsing. I mean, it's absolutely horrid. But if you look at this through another lens, think of what happened to Artemisia years later. Think of how she had no cause to defend herself. The man who raped her, the other artist, was never charged. They knew he was guilty. They never did anything. So these paintings, they're not just provocative pieces for the sake of shock art, but they're actually addressing some of Rome's stinking hypocrisy. We move forward to David and Goliath, a theme that Caravaggio loved and returned to again and again. But somebody should be keeping a tally of how many severed heads we have in this lecture. The thing that's interesting, I'm going to save my point for a little bit. The flagellation of Christ, and fast forward a little bit, one of the things that you'll see about Caravaggio is that his teacher, Pietrezano, painted that in 1590. And look at what Caravaggio did in 1607. The artists back in this day and age, they were painting many common themes. one of the things that's not really understood is that it was no problem to take someone else's song and make it better. And I think of Bob Dylan, and somebody came to him and said, hey, somebody took Mr. Tambourine Man from you, and he turns and says, nobody does it like and he named the band or whoever it was that did it. And he ran with it. He said, they did it better than I did it. He was sure of himself. Caravaggio would take other people's paintings and just make them way better. So in Naples, if you go ever to the Museo del Capodimonte, all the way down at the end of the museum, there's a series of arches descending, and they have this painting, and it's about 10 feet tall as far as my memory goes, life-size figures, and you see violence and agony. I mean, look, this killer's face, by killer, I'm just saying somebody who's brutalizing, this brute's face is eclipsed in darkness. Look at the look on that face, the horror, the violence of the action. And now look over here. I like pictures on this, so I feel bad making fun of them, but we're going to. This right here is like, can I go yet? Can I go yet? All right, am I done posing? And this one over here is like, just kind of like a quick sketch that was turned into something. And Jesus is kind of like, ow, that kind of hurts. Whereas look over here, the head turned down. Same head as Mary Magdalene. The head turned down. Look at the violent heads are supposed to go up straight. It's going perfectly perpendicular to the body. This is violent. This is really extreme. Narcissus. He didn't spare the contemporaries, and he probably was making fun of himself, who knows. But this is Narcissus at the well, but dressed in Roman clothes. Oftentimes Narcissus would be treated as, oh, that's someone else that's Narcissus. But Caravaggio, when he painted this, he was like, you guys are Narcissus, so am I, we all are. Can't tear himself away from his own image. He returned to the boy getting bit by the lizard. And then there's a really interesting moment, and again, I'm quoting from all different sources with Shakespeare and stuff, but what's interesting to me is that Caravaggio, in going in and out of jail, getting into brawls, hanging out with thieves and commoners, and he was a bad guy. Somehow he came to a better understanding of biblical stories than his peers. And that's why I go back to that Mary Magdalene. Like, maybe he knew he was screwed up. Maybe he actually understood this better than anyone. So Jesus, standing in a Roman tavern, calling Matthew. What were tax collectors in the day and age of the Israelites? Tax collectors were working for the Romans, and they were exploiting their own people. So, I'm sorry if there's an IRS agent in the audience saying you work for the Romans, but there's this thing of, if you were a tax collector, you were the scum of Jewish society, and you were just on the outs.
Just going back to the other one where he did another painting again.
Yeah.
Was that common with the painters to do the same thing over and over again?
Very common for, and I was joking around a few weeks ago saying this, I paint lots of violins, and one of the reasons why I paint violins is because violins help pay my mortgage. When I paint one, they sell quickly. And when you read about Caravaggio, when he had a quick sale, he painted another one, and he gave it off to another set of patrons. But sometimes it's also an aesthetic idea. Like, think of Cézanne with Mount Saint Victoire. Think of Monet with the Cathedral of Rouen. Many artists will have motifs that they return and return and return to. So Caravaggio, it seems like aesthetically, he also liked exploring the same theme. That's my feeling. So, but he also wanted to make money. So in a Roman tavern, the figure of Jesus, now Jesus was painted by Leonardo da Vinci, and he has a perm and he looks like really perfect, right? And he's got light behind him. Caravaggio was Jesus in the murky shadows. Caravaggio doesn't even give us his face, and the hand is like kind of like coming out of the dark. And the people who Jesus is pointing to are tax collectors. Do you know what Caravaggio is saying with this piece? He is saying to the clergy, he's saying to all the people who are actually commissioning the paintings, he's saying, God wouldn't have chosen you. God would have chosen the rejects. I mean, this is a really big painting, and it got him in a lot of trouble because he was calling the clergy out on their hypocrisy. They were stockpiling the palaces and filling it with the loot from the colonies. I mean, these people were exploiters. And Caravaggio is saying the refuse of Rome is better and it's more, desirable. I'll read through this quickly. Jesus said to them, "Truly I say to you, the tax collectors and the prostitutes go into the kingdom of God before you." Jesus said that. "For John came to you in the way of righteousness, and you did not believe him, you killed him. But the tax collectors and the prostitutes believed him. And even when you saw it, you did not afterward change your minds and believe him." I mean, Caravaggio, he was flirting with death here. He could have been killed for what he's painting. It's such a big deal to me. I think it's incredible. When you look at how he's actually dialoguing with different periods of time, you can see how he's taking Michelangelo and he's saying, "Hey, Michelangelo, yeah, it's all nice and rosy up in your heaven, but I'm down here in Rome and this place stinks and everyone's dying of the plague and my mom and my dad died when I was really young and this and that. And I don't really view heaven like you view it. I don't really see it as being so pink and perfect and bright yellows and blues. It's dingy and it's dark and I'm fallen and I'm depraved and I keep getting thrown in jail." No fault in his own, Culpa tua. So look at that hand pointing right there. That's actually a quote from Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper. The hand pointing towards the Messiah. This one's like, who, me? Like, me? You're choosing me. Like, I'm a tax collector. I am messed up. Look at the people that Matthew is sitting with. They have swords. He's taking these genre paintings and he's smashing them into spiritual paintings, and then he's hanging them in cathedrals that are run by the clergy. I mean, this is just all like, it's fantastic. He's spoofing everyone. One of the things that disturbed me the most in seeing this painting is that, right there. And it's hard for you guys to see, I'm sure. This painting is the size of a Charlie Yoder painting. It's like, I think does anyone remember 12 feet tall, 12 feet wide? I mean, the thing is massive. It's practically life-size figures. But there's this dark cloud on the ground. What is that dark cloud? We don't know what that dark cloud is. I've never figured it out. But I almost feel like he's making an allusion to the fact that this is the dark underbelly of Rome, and that there's like evil at work in there. I mean, that actually sent shivers down my spine when I saw that, and you don't get any of that in this. And if it sounds like I'm mocking Michelangelo and I don't like him, you guys know that I have problems with how much I love Michelangelo's work. But Caravaggio,
Well, that was a door.
What's that?
I thought it was a door.
It could be. I mean, in looking at it, I actually want to go back to see it in person. But even how it's made, let's say it's a dog, let's say it's a cloak, let's say it's something like that, it's kind of weird and grim. You know what I'm saying? It's like if a dog's face in person, it's sinister. There's something funny about it.
Where is this painting?
That's in San Luigi dei Francesi in Rome. It's my favorite cathedral actually in Rome. It's my favorite. But then let's look at Caravaggio, at Leonardo da Vinci, and see how he's created it. This is right on the other side of the cathedral. You look at the calling of St. Matthew here, and then you look at the martyrdom. Look at the violence of this scene. I mean, this is powerful. This is like fireworks going off. It's dark. Remember what I was talking about before? The world is dark until light shines on it. Caravaggio is coming with a totally different reading of everything. And you know who's really agreeing with in a lot of these treatises are the people who are actually within the Catholic Church, not Protestants, but they're actually, the Dominicans are fighting with the Jesuits about these sorts of things, and Caravaggio is taking sides on it. I mean, look at the light fluffiness, and then look at the violence. I mean, it's really, I'm sorry for calling Raphael light and fluffy, but I'm doing a contextual thing just to say how beautiful and pristine and clean and airy. So at the beginning of tonight, I was talking to a friend here, Nino, and he was talking to me about Bernard Berenson. Bernard Berenson is like almost a keeper of the gate for the Renaissance. Bernard Berenson is one of my favorite minds in the 20th century for what he did for art history and how he exhumed, I mean, a lot of this work and he gave it back to the people. Bernard Berenson, in loving Raphael, hated Caravaggio. He hated him. Caravaggio was he was like the anti-Michelangelo. He inverted everything that was good and right and pure and elevated and clean, and he brought it all down into the gutter. And I think Caravaggio would have been like, yeah, I know. I did it on purpose.
You know,
It's a realist.
Go for it.
respectfully,
Yeah.
I see more Caravaggio addressing spirituality the same way Michelangelo did, except Michelangelo is addressing spiritual reward,
Yes, you are
which
right.
is fantastical.
Yes.
Caravaggio is addressing the spiritual work, which
Yes.
is nitty-gritty.
Which
It's
is
not
nitty-gritty.
necessarily bad, it's just that the work is dirty and painful.
Yeah, I mean, look, that's a great point, because look at two different, like wildly different books in the Bible, something that is glorious and it's the kingdom to come. And you can just think of like anything, like even the book of Acts has a lot of violence in it, but it speaks of things that are on the horizon and hope. You know what I mean? But then think of the book of Revelations. It's like, it's all going down and it's really grim. So yeah, that is an excellent point. And Michelangelo is alluding to just a whole different aspect of this. Maybe could I say the other side of the same coin? So he found his niche by being that. That's a great point. This piece right here, Peter wouldn't even be crucified in the same way that Christ was. So he requested that they crucify him upside down. But look at the power. I mean, these are fulcrums and pivot points, and they're lifting and they're heaving. I think myself that someone in the audience remind me of who I'm thinking of. The guy who painted all of Detroit's public works of the Americans with steel, different things.
Diego Rivera.
Yeah, Diego Rivera, and he worked with Diego Rivera. I'm forgetting his name right now. He's a Midwestern painter. But that looks like something from the Steel Age. They're lifting, they're hoisting, they're powerful sinews, they're muscles. Caravaggio got in big trouble for this. The conversion on the road to Damascus, when Paul falls off his horse, or he's knocked off his horse. And so one of the clergymen walked up to him and said to him, Caravaggio, we asked you to paint St. Paul. You put him on the ground. Because everyone else would have St. Paul like this. And Caravaggio said, yeah, but I put God's light on a horse's haunches. I mean, that is a quote from a contemporary of his. That's hilarious. Yeah, he might have put Paul on the ground, but put God on the horse's, side. And so how did he get away with all this when other people were being burned at the stake? It's hard to penetrate. The suburb of Emmaus, I'm going to move forward a little bit with this. This is a moment in which Thomas is doubting and says, I won't believe until I stick my finger in the actual wound. If anybody else, have you ever seen the St. Sebastian's where like St. Sebastian's getting hit by arrows and there's like 45 arrows and he's like, ow, kind of. And then you look at this, his finger's actually in the wound. I mean, it's disgusting. But he's saying this is life. This is what it is. He painted St. Matthew barefoot with an angel, and guess what happened? The clergy rejected it. They said, that's Matthew. You don't paint him barefoot. Go back and paint another Matthew. Fine, you got a glorious Matthew, okay? This is a great painting. I actually think the clergy are right, because that's a pretty good, it's a beautiful painting. It's now destroyed. In World War II, when the Allies were bombing Berlin, this was destroyed, sadly. This is a fantastic piece. I really, really love this piece. Garden of Gethsemane. Now I'm starting to move a little quicker. I'm sensing clock ticking. Look at the angst of that hand right there. Look, Jesus' face here isn't just one of the horror that's in front of him. It's the fact that somebody who he had dinner with, who he ate with over the course of years was denying him, was betraying him. Betraying him. The look of that face is one of like, et tu, brute, You're going to do this to me, you who I supped with. You're going to do this to me. This is a powerful piece. It was only discovered, how many years ago? 4 years ago? Does anybody know? Maybe 8 years ago. It was lost and they found it in all places in Dublin. Again, Abraham sacrificing Isaac. It's really interesting how the violence that's portrayed. This piece is in the Vatican, and it's an incredible piece because of the motion that takes place here. I mean, that descent is just, he's now at the apex. He said, thank you very much, Raphael. I will take your sense of design. Thank you very much, Da Vinci. I will take your naturalism. And I'm going to bring to it all the naturalism of Germany and the Northern Renaissance, and I'm going to weld it all together, and I'm going to hang it in your church. And look at how he synthesizes from his heroes. I mean, even the hand clutching underneath here is pretty shameless, because he's like, I'm Caravaggio, I can do that. There are the dirty feet. This piece was such a sensation when it was created. It caused such a stir, because the people felt like, yeah, that's me. I don't even have 5 cents, but I want to come in. And yet the clergy were very much of the mindset, they're, stay in your area and let us just have our palaces. I mean, it's an incredible piece. I'm going to fast forward here, I'm going quickly. I have 5 minutes left. Saint Jerome, this piece is in Borghese in Rome. Look at the gorgeous rendering of that arm there. I really love this piece. With this preoccupation with death, mortality, severed heads, and the violent contrast of the silhouette of that hand in front of the bright light of the torso. We haven't seen this before. It's absolutely beautiful. He still found time to do some still life painting. I think that is a really, really wonderful still life painting. I really love it. The Virgin with the child crushing the head of the serpent. Again, these are all biblical prophecies and things of that sort. The Supper of Emmaus. Now, the death of the Virgin, this is a big deal because right now there's a fight in the Catholic Church that the Virgin ascended. So she went up to the sky, she didn't die. So what does Caravaggio do? He hires a local prostitute and he paints her as the Virgin Mary. It's saying that the Virgin Mary died. I mean, you're going to get in big trouble for what you're doing. And so he is starting to get in trouble. He gets in he's in a tennis match, and something happens in the tennis match, and he pulls out a knife and he stabs his opponent in the groin and kills him. It's terrible. If I sound lighthearted, I'm not trying to be. It's absolutely terrible. He's forced to flee to Naples. But something interesting is, think of all the patriarchs, the biblical figures who were murderers. So let's start all the way at the very beginning. People who were admirable, but they were murderers. David, he killed Uriah. Fast forward, we can go through the ages, but Paul was there when Stephen's cloak was thrown at his feet. Paul was really responsible for the death of the early Christians. There are a bunch of people that I'm skipping, but Moses killed an Egyptian. He did it, and that's why he fled to the desert. He kills someone, he flies to Naples. And then he produces this piece. I mean, he's still ascending. So I'm going to fast forward to one of my favorite paintings he ever did. That is Caravaggio's self-portrait. And he sent it back to the Pope, and this was his way of saying, I'm sorry, I killed someone. And Caravaggio had a powerful base of protectors. One time he got caught in a square carrying a knife that he wasn't allowed to have, and he said, oh, I'm on the way to the such and such palace, because he would always brag about how he was friends with the highest people. His friends could no longer protect him. He was a murderer and he was on the run. He sends this back to the Pope, and then he has to continue to flee because, and I'm fast forwarding a lot here, my apologies. Let's fast forward a lot. Yet by late August 1608, sorry for the small text, he was arrested and imprisoned, likely the result of yet another brawl, this time with an aristocratic knight, during which the door of the house was battered down and the knight seriously wounded. Caravaggio is a painter and he's beating up knights. I mean, he's such a tough guy. Caravaggio was imprisoned by the Knights of Valletta, but he managed to escape. Why haven't we seen a great movie on this guy yet? I don't know. By December, he had been expelled from the order as a foul and rotten member. He got kicked out of the Knights Order that they voted him into, a formal phrase used in all such cases. So we see Caravaggio, I'll double back a little bit to some of the pieces. You can see a really contrite person who's really broken, busted up. The people who would see Caravaggio at this point in his life saw him traveling through the towns, and they would say about him that he looked like a tormented madman. His face was slashed, he got in a fight and somebody cut him really badly, so he had a thick scar running across his face. And he's painting these pieces like mad, and he's sending them off to aristocracy, and he's still making a fair amount of money. But have you ever seen someone who understood suffering, pain, agony? He finds the time to do a really great portrait that would even make Van Dyck jealous. Another portrait. But he's sensing his own end. He's sensing the end for himself. He knows that it's all catching up with him. A sleeping Cupid, he got in trouble because he actually painted this from a corpse. He sends another self-portrait to the Pope, saying, I'm really, really sorry. How many separate pens do I have to send to you, Pope? And I'll quote this: a man whose behavior was becoming increasingly bizarre, which included sleeping fully armed. He was struggling with paranoia. And then his clothes, maybe it wasn't paranoid, maybe people were trying to kill him. Ripping up a painting at a slight word of criticism and mocking local painters. Oh, what a jerk. Mocking local painters. His last painting, it's Ursula. I forget the end of the story, but long story short, it's a martyrdom scene. Not his best work. And Caravaggio dies on a beach in Malta. But here's the most painful thing about his death. In his death, he had just been granted absolution by the Pope. And he was a free man. And nobody to this day knows how Caravaggio died. There's so many speculations, as like art historians love getting into this kind of thing. I do too. But like, did somebody kill him? Did he die of sunstroke? Did he have a fever? Did he have tuberculosis? Did he have lead poisoning? There's so many theories out there. But Caravaggio dies, and I haven't done the math. Was he 39? I think he was right about there. And his career ends. But the thing that is so gripping to me is that, going back to John Keats's poem, is that he had really a 10-year window, and I only gave you about probably 50% of his work. So if you're in the Atelier, the moral of the story is don't kill anyone. And paint lots of paintings, because he did all this in 10 years. So that's a word for me as well. Are there any questions out there, comments, insights? We're a little bit past 8:30. I don't want to keep you guys.
You said that at the very beginning he was painting realistically, but he was a relatively new student, wasn't he? I mean, new to painting?
No, actually, that's one of the things. I actually always thought he was fairly new, but he spent a long time in Pietro Zano's workshop. So he was young, he was grinding colors and stuff like that. So I think he actually had a fairly long education. I can look it up. I think he was in his 7 or 8 years. And Pietro Zano, I've always heard that Caravaggio really had no teacher, that he was just born great. But then I looked at Pietro Zano's work, I was like, he's a really good painter. So I think it's important for us to remember, like, Caravaggio, these people didn't like spring out of just nowhere, but they were birthed by a time period. Their mindsets, Galileo played a big role, I think, in what Caravaggio painted. I think actually Galileo played a huge role, because Galileo said, stand up to the masses, even when they tell you to back down. So, that's my thing.
As far as I know, there's no existing drawing by Caravaggio.
That's right, yeah.
Strictly a painter.
Yeah.
As was Velázquez.
Yeah.
There's one drawing by Velázquez.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, that's fascinating, like that in of itself. Like, is it possible that every single drawing by Caravaggio and Velázquez got destroyed? Yes, it's possible, but then how do we have hundreds by other artists who, like, obviously Da Vinci left us thousands, Michelangelo left us scores, but even their workshops had copies after their drawings. We don't even have that for Caravaggio. So that's the thing that really moves me about Caravaggio, is he wanted to paint from life itself. The way that somebody's forehead went up like that when they're looking over his shoulder, he wanted that, and he wanted to get it from life. I mean, it's no secret, here at the Atelier, we paint from live models, And boy, is it hard to lock in those models and make sure they show up on time, this and that. I'm not making fun of anyone, I'm just saying life is busy on Long Island, there's a lot going on, and yet we insist on it because the raised forehead, the wrinkles that come over here, the way that somebody will look, the undersides of the eyes, you know what I mean? The drawings, it's a filter. I think, I'm sorry, what was your name?
Me?
Yeah,
Colleen.
Colleen. The exact what Colleen had said, there's something lost in that middle step. Something gained, if you look at another way, but something lost. So it's fascinating, no drawings. So.
Do we know what became